Calling all instructional coaches. Join Forward Edge for Coaches Camp in summer 2023. Coaches Camp is packed with high-quality professional development exclusively for you. Attendees will work with like-minded coaches on creating strategies for building teacher relationships, executing coaching cycles, and building a culture of coaching and tech integration within their district. There are 2 opportunities to attend Coaches Camp in the summer of 2023. You can join us virtually June 12th through 14th, or come visit us in Cincinnati on July 27th and 28th. Please visit forward-edge.net/coachcamp to reserve your spot today.
Aloha, I'm Katie Ritter.
And I'm Justin Thomas, and this is the Restart Recharge podcast, a podcast by coaches for coaches. We bring you the tips and tricks to help you in your everyday work as an instructional coach or whatever they call you in your school.
So hopefully you're going to leave this episode with us today feeling just a little bit less on your own coaching island.
Well, as we near the end of the school year, it is time to reflect on our coaching and decide what went well and what we can utilize for next year. However, there will likely be some methods and practices that probably should not make the trip into next year. Rather, they should just end or perish with the finish of this school year. So with us today is Jon Smith from BookCreator, and Jon is going to talk a little bit more with us about death of certain EdTech practices and how this actually could be a good thing for our coaching. So that should be really interesting. But first, let's go ahead and introduce who Jon Smith is, in case you're not sure. Jon Smith is currently the Teacher Success Manager for BookCreator and an Apple Distinguished Educator class of 2015. Jon was a special education teacher for 12 years before spending 7 years as a technology integration specialist for Alliance City Schools in Ohio, where his digital book projects have attracted attention for their global reach and practical approaches to integrating transliteracy practices in the classroom. Jon organized 9 global digital book projects in which classrooms from around the world wrote and published digital books. He is married with 3 children. Jon is a scratch golfer, and in his spare time, Jon also details cars. You can connect with Jon on Twitter at the iPod Teacher. So welcome in Jon Smith once again here on the Restart Recharge podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me. I guess that's a good thing, right? If you get invited back.
Oh, yes.
I must not have offended too many people. So I don't know if that means I didn't do my job or or what. So yeah, no, thanks for having me. And that was a good intro. I don't know who wrote that, but it sounded nice. I appreciate it.
Oh, no problem. It's actually what we had from you for last time, I figured.
No, I'm kidding. I think somebody wrote it. I think my good friend Jeremy Brook used the words transliteracy, though, because I didn't even know what that meant when he wrote it. I was like, it sounds cool, so I'll keep using it.
Maybe you should get him to write our bios, too.
Yeah, sounds good.
Well, Jon, we're glad to have you back. And I'll go ahead and kick it off. So when Justin first came to me with this idea, he's like, hey, we want to have Jon Smith on again. We were talking to him. He wants to talk about what just needs to die. And I'm like, okay, I think you're going to have to give me a little bit more than that, Justin. So he was like, no, it's really good. So anyway, once he described it, I'm like, okay, I'm on board. Let's dive in. So maybe kind of in the spirit of that vein, Jon, I think myself and our listeners might like to hear it straight from you. Give us a little bit more background. Like, where'd you come from with this topic?
Yeah, so it's a little weird, I have to admit, right? Especially coming from the BookCreator guy. Like, what? He wants to talk about death? So yeah, no, I started this thought process, I guess, years and years and years ago, and it kind of has just evolved over time. So when I left special ed and went into this tech integration role, I was talking with the principal one day, and he's like, hey, we got this thing. We've done it for years. It's called Learning at Lunch. And I was like, okay. And he's like, what we do is once a month, we feed the staff during their lunch breaks. You can come in, you teach technology, right? So this was kind of like this leftover thing from the lady who I replaced, right? She retired, and it was just kind of one of those things where it was like, she's done it for a decade. We're going to keep doing it. You're going to do it, like whatever. And I was like, okay, cool. So I actually enjoyed it, right? Like, it was a really cool time to have teachers come in, and I would teach technology for 3 periods, or 3 lunch breaks during the day. The teachers would get fed. They were happy. They were listening, because they got fed, and it was always a captive audience. And I was like, this is pretty cool. So we did this for, I don't know, like a year or 2. And then the principal came to me and he's like, hey, I'm out of money. He's like, I can't feed anybody anymore. So we're going to have to like not do learning at lunch. Do you have any ideas? And I was like, I don't know. I was like, let me think about it. Right. So I think about it. I come back to him later that day and I was like, why don't we do something in the morning? Right. I was like, we always have this, at least at the high school, from 7 to 7:30 every day. They had like some kind of planning. And I was like, let's do like on Fridays. I was like, let's do something called, I don't know, computers. And he's like, oh, computers and coffee. And I was like, yes, except I don't like coffee. And which is weird because I've got all these Starbucks mugs behind me. Right. So I'm like,
Yeah, you're right.
I was like, I don't do coffee. I was like, so let's do computers and cronuts. Right. And he's like, what's a cronut? And I was like, well, it's like a glazed croissant. It's like a donut on steroids, right? I was like, it's amazing. He's like, okay, sounds great. He goes, are you going to bring the cronuts? And I was like, no. I was like, I don't have any money either. I was like, I'm just going to call it computers and cronuts.
I'm bringing the computer part.
Right. Yeah, right. I was like, I'm not. He's like, well, I'll buy some coffee or something. I was like, okay. Well, first of all, he never did. So we never had cronuts and we never had coffee, right? So it was all a lie to begin with. But anyway. So everybody showed up on Fridays, and it was all voluntary, right? It was just like, hey, you want to come in at 7:00? You want to learn some technology? Come on in. So, people did, and I would have like 6 to 10 people like every Friday. And so this was going great. And I loved it. The people loved it who attended. And this lasted about maybe a year and a half, again, another year and a half, 2 years or whatever. And eventually I started realizing that it was always the same people. Right, that would show up. It was the same 6 people. It was the same 10 people. People who were always like a captive audience. Right, they're like drinking the Jon Smith Kool-Aid any chance they got. Right, and I was like, all right, I love these people. But I started to realize that there were a whole lot of other people in this school that really needed to come down here and like learn some technology, right, and learn something different. And so as I was talking to the principal about it, I was like, I think we need to change this a little bit, right? Because, whatever. And so we talked and we're like, well, let's make it mandatory. And I was like, okay. And he's like, but let's do it 3 days a week instead of like 1 day a week. And I was like, all right, yeah, okay, cool. Let's try this. Well, that got old like real fast, right? Because second you say mandatory, like
feels like the kiss of death.
Oh, I mean, rubber stamped death right there, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it was just over the second that we came up with this idea that it was mandatory. So we tried it. And to be completely honest, the teachers hated it. Like they hated it. They hated me even more than I think they did some of them to begin with. Like it was real bad, real fast. And I was like, we've got to do this. And change something, because I was like, I can't handle it. And so we keep trying it, and it was, again, just really bad. And I got into like this like really dark space, right? Because I was like, I hated going to work. I didn't want to go to computers and cronuts 3 days a week. I didn't like half the people I was talking to anymore. Like it was weird, right? Like I was like, I hate this. And so I'm at another conference one day and I'm there with one of our curriculum directors and we're chatting about this idea, right? Like I was like, she's like, how are things going? And I was like, I hate everything right now. I was like, I don't want to be here. I don't like what I'm doing. And she's like, well, why? And I kind of told her the story, like what we just talked about. And she goes, and I was like, it's just not a good place, And she goes, well, she said something to me and I was like, wait, what? And she looked at me and she goes, maybe that's a good thing. And I was like, I don't think you listen to anything I just said. Like, everybody hates me. I hate all of them. Like, I don't feel like I'm in a good place. Like, how is this a good thing? Like, please explain this to me. And she goes, well, maybe it's a good thing because the teachers don't need you. And I was like, wait, this is getting even worse. Like, they don't need me. And she's like, well, no. She's like, listen. She's like, maybe they don't need you in the way that they've needed you in the past. Right. And I was like, okay. And she's like, well, maybe they don't need you to just spoon feed them technology and ideas. Maybe they need something different. And I was like, oh. And I was like, okay. And so then we kind of started this idea of, technology coach, right? This coaching thing was starting to come around, and I was like, oh, sure, I'll change my title, right, to like technology coach. And maybe that'll change some things. And I started working more like on this one-to-one level with the teachers. And it was really a lot more interesting, right? And so the teachers would come to me and we would talk about lessons and we'd talk about ways we can incorporate technology and all this kind of stuff. And it was kind of cool, right?
Yeah.
But before that, like I was like, okay, this is interesting. Like this idea that, computers and cronuts is bad. Like, and we just need it to die, right? Like we need it to be gone. And so this whole idea of, like getting rid of it and letting computers and cronuts suffer this death became like this interesting thing to me. And so before I moved on to this other coaching thing, we had like a funeral service for it. We had like this, like people came up and spoke. Like I had like a funeral arrangement set up, and I made like flyers
It
and things
sounds
like
like
that.
a roast of the computers and cronuts.
It was a complete death ceremony, right? We had this funeral for computers and cronuts. And so it was interesting. And so again, it was kind of this idea that everything changed, right? And I think, as morbid as it sounds, at the beginning when you're talking about like what are the things in your life that just need to die, right? Like it's really not a bad thing, right? And I think that the curriculum director made me realize that as a teacher, right, or as a human, right, we have things in our lives, personally, professionally, and everywhere in between, that just need to go away, right? They just and sometimes we don't give ourselves permission to just let it die and just say, you know what, that's not working for me anymore. We need to try something different. And so that's kind of where this whole idea started from.
Yeah, it kind of makes me think of that whole concept that you hear in education sometimes around, the like what's wrong with education sometimes, or what's wrong with XYZ is because there was, when you ask someone, why do we do this? And the response is just like, well, we've always done it that way, right? I mean, I think that's what you're getting at here. And I think it's also really interesting time to have this conversation, not just around, right? Like there's so many things. It could be like a tool you're using. It could be the way you're using this, whether it's technology or it's not technology, right? Like maybe you need to let that worksheet go and it's not best serving your students anymore, all the way to like these larger programs that are more systemic, like in your case, the computers with cronuts or whatever it may be. So I think it's super interesting because I think of very much as you're telling that story and kind of bringing the context to this whole idea here. I just think so much about these past couple of years and just so many things that are happening in classrooms. I just feel like I've talked with so many administrators over the past couple of years that have just said, we don't need to focus on technology anymore. We're going to move away from it because our teachers are tired of it, or they're just like putting the kids to babysit the kids with the technology now, and it's just so disheartening to me because I think it falls like yeah, if that is what you're doing, you should get rid of that, but you shouldn't get rid of technology. Like technology is not going away in the world that we're preparing these kids for, and these new skills that we need. So I don't know, I'm about to go down a whole rabbit hole around maybe we need to get rid of maybe we need to let the testing systems in which force and pigeonhole our educators like into teaching and thinking that they can't do these other things. Maybe we need to let those things go away. But anyway, I just think it's really interesting and a good thing for all of our educators to think about. What are those things that, like, if you can't directly connect it to really great success stories for your staff, for your students, for the community, if you can't explain exactly why it started, why it still is taking place in the way it is, then you should at the very least have a conversation around getting rid of it or changing it, right? So something new and better can come to fruition.
Absolutely. So I have two thoughts. So the one, first off, you were talking, and it made me think of I think it was Holly Clark. We were chatting with Holly Clark one day, and she was talking about this idea of tech fatigue, right? And I think that's kind of where teachers are. We're like, well, we don't want to use technology anymore. We want to go back to the way it was in the 50s or whatever, right? Like we just want to go back because it was easier than trying to learn all this technology. I think the issue, for me at least, isn't it's not, I don't think it's real. I don't think it's true tech fatigue, right? I don't think the kids are tired of tech, because when they leave school, they're still going to Instagram, they're still going to TikTok, they're still doing stuff. So they're not tired of tech. I think they're tired of the way it's being used.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that, again, this is a perfect kind of segue, right? Like, okay, if my kids are tired of technology, or if they're tired of it, or if I'm tired of it, then maybe I'm not using it in the right way.
Right.
Maybe that's the kind of thought that I need to fix and change. And I think the other thing that you mentioned too, as we're looking at things, I think sometimes as teachers we don't give ourselves again permission to move on, right? Like we've done it this way for 10 years, it's not getting any better, but I'm not going to quit, right? Like I'm going to stick with this until it works, right? And so that may be good in some situations, but it may not be good in a lot of situations. And I think sometimes you have to give yourself permission to say, you know what, I tried something. I tried it again. It still isn't quite working. Maybe there were some successes with it. Maybe there were lots of failures with it or something, but I can take the good pieces and move them into a new idea and get rid of the bad ones, get rid of the ideas that didn't work. And hopefully that moves you forward in some way.
Yeah, well, and I appreciate that teacher who looked at you and, that was maybe not the most comfortable thing for her to say. It clearly wasn't the most comfortable thing for you to hear until she fully fleshed out the thought process. But good for her for, challenging you in a really productive, kind, and caring way to make you reconsider how you were approaching something. So I think that might lead us into our next question that Justin has. But before we dive into that, we're going to take a super quick break from our sponsors.
Calling all instructional technology coaches, Forward Edge has launched a new hub for coaches to find strategies and resources to use for their coaching. The EDU Coach Network provides a place for instructional coaches to come together for coach-specific professional development, building a community, and finding mentorship moving through the school year. The network provides a place to casually seek resources or join in with book clubs, Twitter chats, webinars, and workshops, along with much more. Join the EDU Coach Network by going to educoachnetwork.com and join the coach community today. Edu Badges, the Anytime Anywhere badging program to learn EdTech tools and strategies, is now open for individuals to sign up. Whether you're an instructional coach looking for new ideas to share, or a teacher wanting to implement more technology in your classroom, Edu Badges is the answer. Individuals can now sign up for both the free or premium account by visiting edubadges.com. And as a listener of the podcast, you can get $20 off your premium account by using promo code PODCAST. So visit edubadges.com and begin earning your badges. All right, welcome back, Justin Thomas, Dr. Katie Ritter, and we're here with Jon Smith from BookCreator, and we are having an EdTech Eulogy right now in terms of figuring out the fact that sometimes we might actually need some of these practices and ideas and things that we've done for so long to actually just die out and give rebirth to something that is new. So we talked a little bit about Jon's story and how he got on this topic, but let's look at what are some ways that a coach should evaluate their offerings in a way to help them understand what is actually something that they should keep and maybe something they should let die.
Yeah, I struggled with this one a little bit, right? When I was thinking about this kind of thought. And I think first off, I think it has to be relevant, right? Like whatever it is that you're working on, or whatever you're teaching, or whatever you're helping somebody through, it has to be relevant. I can't continue to talk about technology tools that are outdated or don't work on modern computers or don't work on Chromebooks or, like whatever. I can't continue to use those old tools, right? I'm not going to pull out the abacus, in my calculus class because it worked 100 years ago, 200 years ago, right? I'm going to move with the times. And I think that that's the first thing, right? So as we're coaching, as we're talking, looking at current research and current ideas around student learning and district goals, which are changing, right, all the time. I think those are the things that we need to keep in mind, right? The relevance of that kind of stuff and keep it current. And the same thing with teacher goals, right? So yeah, we've got district goals, but teachers have goals too, right? And students have goals. So what do I want to get out of my class, or what do I want to get out of my students, and how can this idea of moving away from some of the older stuff address the new goals, address the new procedures and current events and things like that are going on in the world?
Well, Jon, that makes me think. So I think in like some really tangible advice that based on what you're saying, that I might give to our listeners. I know our team, we have a feedback form that we all use and give and ask teachers to fill out anytime we give professional development in a group setting. Then we also have a different one for coaching cycles. And both of them have they're super short and sweet, especially the PD feedback one. But there's a question on there, just a quick scale, 1 to 5. Like, I will, agree strongly, strongly agree, strongly disagree. I will use this information with my students or respective stakeholder group. And we are constantly looking at that. And our coaches are always looking at that feedback that they get after they deliver PD, because that's an immediate, quick pulse way. People might not always tell you, might not always have those great champions in your corner and in your network who are willing to like professionally help you and challenge you. So not everyone's just going to be forthcoming. So you can't expect that. And, you may not be able to be in every classroom every day to understand what they're actually taking back and implementing, but and thinking through the ways that you solicit feedback and creating sort of a constant pulse check on what you're doing with the teachers, and knowing, obviously if it's a teacher audience, are they actually going to use this with their students? Do they actually feel like it's relevant and they're excited? And that can be a really quick way in the moment to give you as the coach feedback on, hey, I'm missing the mark a little bit, or, no one's showing up to Cronuts, or it's just my same people who are coming, right? So, yeah, good ideas there.
Yeah.
So, okay. Jon, we are, it's a short episode today with just a handful of kind of prepared questions. But before, as you know, because you've been here before, we end every episode on top 3 tips. And sorry, loyal listeners, it's me, not Justin this time. Justin's way more fun to listen, go into it. But before we move into top 3 tips, is there anything kind of outside of that you want to kind of take this and speak to before we kind of wrap up with those tips?
Yeah, so I did have 2 other ideas that I kind of wanted to kind of mention. So I think one of the things, again, as teachers, coaches, one of the things we look at a lot of times, we look at lessons and we look at things in kind of a post-mortem kind of way. So we're keeping along with the death theme here, right? We look at things after it died, right? We're like, oh, that lesson was awful. What can I do now? Right. And then a lot of times we don't really fix it until like the next year when we teach that lesson again. Right. So there's a lot of time that goes in between that. And then the next year comes around and maybe you forgot the things that you didn't like and you just do it again.
Yep.
Right. So one of the ideas that I really have started to kind of think about, and we started doing this the last couple of years that I was at the high school, is we started looking at lessons pre-mortem. Right. So we looked at them before the lesson had a chance to die. And what I thought was really nice, and I think this is great for coaching, I think it's great for content teams, I think it's great for mixed teams, right? We did this at the high school with people from all kinds of different grades and curriculum areas. But the teachers would get a chance to go up and say, here's the lesson I'm going to teach in a couple of weeks, and here's what I'm planning on doing, right? And so we would all just kind of sit back and listen, and then we had a whole series of questions that we would ask for clarification. And then we'd say, well, what if you tried this? What if you did this? How about this? That kind of stuff. And so we tweaked and massaged the lesson ahead of time, and then hopefully we were able to fix it before the lesson had a chance to die. And so hence the term pre-mortem, right? So it was, again, kind of a fun thought process, but I thought,
Jon, I'm curious. Yeah, no, I'm glad you did. I'm curious if you could, I want to dig into that structure in case we've got coaches listening that maybe want to kind of take that idea back to their school. So you say a teacher had an opportunity to present this lesson ahead, to a group of their peers ahead of actually teaching it to students. What did that look like? What was the space? Were you doing like PLCs? Was it a department meeting? Was it meet with the coach? And so it was really just like more of a one-on-one with teacher coach. What did that structure actually look like to facilitate that type of feedback and reflection, preflection, I guess, with teacher?
Yeah, I like that one too. Preflection. Yeah. I'm not very good with preflection. I can't even reach my toes. But anyway, no, the idea was, when we first started it, we got grade level teams together in the morning before the students arrived. We didn't have coaches in our school the way like that most schools have now. We didn't have those, so it was basically just department or grade level teams. But it was grade level teams that were mixed, right? So you'd have the social studies team, you'd have the the ninth grade social studies teacher, ninth grade math teachers, the ninth grade science teachers, all in a room. And it was a little scary, right, at first, because it was like, well, who's gonna go up there first as a high school teacher to show their lesson to other high school teachers, right? Because it was like, nah, we're a little scared. So I don't remember whoever did it first, but it was a real safe space, right? And so the idea was, as a teacher, before you plan your lesson, reflecting on your students. What are they good at? What are they not good at? What do you know about your kids, right? Talking about your kids, then designing your lesson. And so then the teacher would actually get up in front of us, not actually teach the whole lesson, right? But just kind of outline it and say, this is what we're going to do first. Here's the thing that we're going to do. Here's the activity that we do. Here's the test that it's going to be at the end of this kind of process, like whatever. Just kind of go through all of the different bits and pieces. And then the rules were that as the teacher's presenting this, like, we're not allowed to talk, right? Like, nobody's allowed to be like, that sounds like a crappy idea, right? Like, nobody's allowed to heckle. Just sit and listen.
Yeah,
and
good rule.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then furiously taking notes, right? Like taking notes on everything that's going on. And then the design team, right? The group of people that were sitting here, then we start asking clarifying questions, like, not suggestions, right? No aha moments, none of that, just clarifying questions. So if a teacher said, we're going to do this activity, I might say, like, what is the product? You mentioned that your kids are making a product at the end of this. What is that product, right? Like, what tech tools are you using for that product? How are the students going to show mastery, or, whatever the case may be? We would ask those clarifying questions. Then the person who was presenting would answer the questions. And then people, again, furiously taking notes and that kind of stuff. And then as a team, we offered positive feedback only, right? We just said, okay, here are the things that I love about your lesson. Have at it. And then after we hit you with all the kindness and all the fun stuff, right, and all the things that we loved about the lesson, then that's when we start saying, maybe here are some other ideas that could help increase student engagement, help increase success with your lesson, right? And sometimes it was teachers who were like, listen, I know who's in your class. I know 5 of those kids, and I know for a fact that those 5 kids really love basketball, baseball, or whatever. So when you're talking stats and math, maybe you want to tie that into some fantasy sports to really get those 5 kids. Because if you don't, they're going to make your life miserable, right? Like if they're not bought into it, maybe they're going to make your life miserable. So maybe you might want to try something like this. And the teacher was like, okay, cool, right? And then the teacher, after listening to all of these ahas, what ifs, how about kind of moments, then the teacher can respond and say, I like the idea of fantasy baseball, but I don't know anything about it. Right. And so then that helps open up the door where coaches can come in and say, oh, hey, if you know anything about fantasy sports, no worries, because guess what? John does, Katie understands it. So why don't you talk to them about it? So that kind of stuff. So that's kind of how it worked. And then the teacher went off and did the lesson. And then at the next meeting, that teacher would do a quick recap and say, here's what was successful. Here's what didn't quite work, or this idea really changed my life because last year I didn't do something like that. And this year I did. And so then they would start, and then a new teacher would come in and do the whole process again. And we did this every week.
I love that so much. I think Justin's skeptical that you said I know fantasy. But I love it so much. It just, it makes me think of our season opener this season with Jimmy Costas and just talking about like everyone's a coach, and like you guys really created that culture of a team of educators coaching and supporting one another. I think an idea like that in some capacity would just be so wonderful in terms of like creating really sustainable and like teacher leadership teams, and like really helping to ripple affect what the coach can do, and especially our coaches who might be in really big districts. And I immediately thought like, golly, I wonder, like I would have taken advantage of that so much before observations to have a community of my peers with more experience and run through my plan with them. It would have made everything feel so much less intimidating and made me feel all the more confident. And I could just see that, if that's where I started, maybe then, building and expanding well beyond that. So I love that idea.
Well, we did something similar to this on a Twitter chat once, right? And it was really funny because we were kind of going through this idea and this process on a Twitter chat, and there was like a kindergarten teacher, or no, sorry, there was an AP. I was like, who has the first question, right? And it was an AP government teacher, and I was like, oh gosh, like I was like, this is the first question I'm going to get is from the AP government guy, right? I'm like, oh no. I was like, this is not going to be good. And so he asked this question about how he can make a lesson better. And I was like, I was waiting for crickets, right? Like I was like, this isn't good, because I didn't even have any answers right at the time. Well, the Twitter chat person, the first person to respond was a kindergarten teacher. And I was like, let's see how this goes, right?
Yeah.
And the idea was phenomenal, right?
Yeah.
And the government teacher was like, he caught me the next day in school, and he's like, dude, I was part of the Twitter chat last night. He's like, and I was like, I know. I was like, you scared me when you answered asked your first question. And I was like, because I was like, I thought you were just going to kill the whole Twitter chat, right? And he started laughing, and he goes, but the kindergarten teacher idea, he goes, that was unbelievable. I never would have thought of that. And so what I love about this idea is that you get a room full of people, and if you're the AP calculus teacher and you're up there talking about your lesson, you never would have thought, or you never would have asked, right, the cosmetology teacher to have an idea for how to improve your AP calculus class. You never would have thought that, right? And if you're sitting there going like, oh, that's kind of rude, but it's true, right? Like if I'm an AP calculus teacher, I'm not running to the cosmetology teacher to think that, that they might have a good answer. But sometimes they do, because they're just outside of your box enough that they're going to be like, oh, well, have you ever thought about this? Right. And it just gives you that fresh kind of perspective. And I think that's what's really powerful about this, is that they're your peers, and they're people that you'll talk to at lunch. They're people that you'll talk to after school, but you're not going to ask them curriculum questions on a normal basis, because that's not what they teach.
Yeah.
But it's really cool, because a whole lot of stuff comes out of it.
Yeah, I love it. And I'm curious, did you happen to call it maybe like class plans with cronuts?
I didn't, but I think that was cool. No, I think I don't even know what we called it. Oh, design team meetings, I think, is what we called them. But yeah, so it definitely wasn't as catchy as classroom cronuts or classroom lesson cronuts or whatever. So yeah, it was not catchy. But
yeah, I love
worked.
it. That was a slam dunk idea. And you said, when I asked you if you had anything else, you said two things before we move into your top 3 tips. Did that cover both of them, or did you have?
I think so. No, it was.
Just say yes with confidence if you forgot. Yeah.
Yes. No, it was the idea of postmortem versus premortem. So those two pieces was the idea. So
yeah.
Awesome.
Okay.
Oh, I gotta say something real quick though.
Go
just
for it.
a reminder: the first 2 episodes prior to this one all about elementary. So maybe you can get some ideas there for your secondary if you're in that spot, based off what Jon said. So.
Oh, absolutely. I was trying not to do too many BookCreator plugs in this one, but I have to say, like, whenever I'm doing a webinar on BookCreator, right, I always tell people one of my favorite places to go is the Discover section, because it's just filled with student books that kids make. And every time I teach a high school group, I'm always like, hey, go down and check out the kindergarten books. I don't care what you think. I don't care what, what, if you think it's not relative or related to your content at all, go check out the kindergarten books. It's amazing. And I say the same thing to kindergarten teachers. I was like, I don't care if you teach AP government or not, go check out the government books, because it might give you an idea of something that you can use in your classroom.
All right, Jon. Well, if you want to we'll move into kind of the last question here of your top 3 tips for helping educators and coaches get comfortable burying some old practices that they have.
Lay them to rest.
Yeah, laying them to rest. I think that one of the biggest pieces is really to focus on what was successful. All right. So I think, again, too often, even personally, right, something goes wrong and you really focus on the bad parts of it. And even if it's bad, there's always something that you can look at to find success. And I think that's an important piece, right? And I think the other part of that, the second piece, would be to actually listen to yourself, right? So, like, I can sit here and say this all I want, but when my son comes home and he's a middle school kid, and if he frustrates me, I have to look at the successes, right? Like, I have to just think about not all the negative stuff. I got to think about some things that are positive, right? And really focus on those. So I think, giving yourself permission to focus on the success is okay. You're allowed to do that. And you're allowed to think about that. And I also think as the flip side of that, focus on the failures, right? Like what went wrong, and how can, and that's okay. We my wife and I talk to my kids about this all the time. It's okay if you fail, but just don't do it again. Right? Like can you learn from the mistake? Don't, if this is the piece that caused the problem, don't repeat that over and over again.
Absolutely.
Take a look at the failures, accept it, and move past it. And I think that's that's an important piece, just doing that. And I guess the third piece would be that, again, not looking at death as a bad thing, but looking at it as a success, right? Or a celebration, right? Not necessarily
a sign of growth.
It's a sign of growth. Absolutely. I just think that's important. And I guess the last thing I mentioned fourth. You said three. I'm going to give you a fourth. So sorry about that.
Hey, bonus.
The one, that's right, bonus thing. I think that some people who are listening right now are probably like, what is that list? Like, what are the things in education that just need to die? Like, give me the list, John. I want the answers. And you wouldn't believe how many people I've had email me that and say, give me them. What's the list? Right? I want the list of things that need to die. And the answer is, I'm not going to give you a list, right? Because my list is different than Justin's list. Justin's list is different than Katie's list. Katie's list is different than everybody else's list. The point is that we all have a list, right? Like if we sit back and think about it, we all have that list. So my list is very personal to me. Your list is very personal to you, and everybody else's list is very personal to their classrooms and their situations, right? Personally and professionally. So I can't tell you what needs to die in your classroom. I can't tell you that. You have to figure that out on your own. And I know it's kind of a cop out because I'm not going to give you any answers, but it's the truth. And I think that's part of the growth, is thinking and reflecting on that and trying to figure out what those things are.
Yeah. Well, in the spirit of a bonus, I want to add one that, your initial story just kind of inspired me. I would just also encourage, especially our coaches, listening, don't be afraid to question your colleagues, right? Just in a really supportive way. But maybe that's just a good question to keep in your back pocket as you're having conversations. Like, what if you totally reinvented this? What if you didn't do this anymore and you had the opportunity to think it up from scratch? What would you do? How would you do it? Right? I think, you were fortunate enough to have that colleague who planted that seed to force you, to challenge you to think outside that box. So yeah. I think we have a good audience to help our educators do that.
Yeah. Awesome.
Well, John, this has been a fascinating episode, as it always is with you, with all your ideas and everything like that you have. And we got all sorts of tips here too. So we went beyond the top 3 tips. You gave a bonus tip, and even Katie jumped in with a bonus tip. So plenty.
I just really kind of stole and repurposed part of John's story. So it's really his. He had double bonus.
Double bonus.
It's all good. That's the way it works, right? That's the way it's supposed to work.
Absolutely. Well, John, thank you again for joining us here on the Restart Recharge podcast with this fun episode. As Katie kind of said, when we met initially with Brooke and I, we're kind of talking through it. We're like, this is really cool. And then I was like, I got to figure out how to explain it well enough to what you did for Brooke and I to explain it to her. So she'd be like, what is going on with this? So I guess I did a decent enough job, since she was like, yeah, that might work. So I'm glad that you were willing to share this with us here on the podcast.
I did this talk once in front of about 3,000 people. And I remember going up on stage and saying, my name's Jon Smith, blah, 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 blah. And I'm completely fascinated with death. And the whole room was just like,
what?
What are we in for?
What is this? And I was like, it's okay. I'm all right. Trust me. I'm fine. So anyway, yeah, no, I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to kind of, muddle through this and explain my weird thought processes on things. But yeah, I think it's
John,
important.
any conferences that you're going to be at over the summer, or any places you'll be to
give
our listeners a heads up?
Yeah, absolutely. So summer, first will be ISTE. We will be at ISTE. We'll have a big booth, which will be fun. So if you've used BookCreator and you love us and you want to come pat us on the back and tell us how cool we are, great. If you don't, then don't go to ISTE. Go somewhere else. No, I'm kidding. If you
let that die out.
That's right. You have questions, concerns, or things you want to know about BookCreator, come see us at ISTE. That would be awesome. Other than that, I'm trying to think what else is happening in the summer. I'm going to be doing some school visits. So I'll be in Florida. I'll be in New York. I'll be in Pennsylvania. I will be in, maybe Colorado, I think. So lots of stuff. So I'll be kind of around. We will be at the Lights Conference in October in New York, which we haven't been to before. And until we get to like FETC and TCA, that kind of takes us to the end of 2023.
Awesome. So you're going to be everywhere. Well, we look forward to seeing you. And thanks again for being on the pod today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, kind of speaking a little bit to ISTE, we will actually be back using the interactive Google for Education Adaptive Learning Lab. So we are actually going to have Angela Lyman and Jamie Clausius is going to join us to talk a little bit more about what that all entails, because they've been doing a traveling version of that throughout the entire school year. But we'll be back at ISTE doing that and partnering with Google for Education. So that's going to be really exciting. And you can get a little kind of teaser from the Restart Recharge podcast before heading to ISTE.
So be sure to subscribe to Restart Recharge wherever you listen to podcasts, and follow us on all the social media at RRCoachCast.
And as always, feel free to reach out to us and let us know any topics that you would like us to discuss. We're happy to do so here on the podcast.
So press the restart button,
recharge your coaching batteries, and leave feeling equipped and inspired to coach fearlessly with the Restart Recharge podcast,
a Tech Coach Collective. All right, guys.
Cool.
John.
Nailed it. Jon, thanks again so much. It's always nice to have your energy on the podcast. And thanks again for being patient with all my craziness at the very beginning.
That's all good. I appreciate it. I was half waiting for my kids to come home and the dog to start barking. So I kept texting my wife being like, don't forget, I have a podcast I'm recording. Like,
yeah.